You won't believe what Michael did with the wives of the fallen angels. Book of Enoch. Have you ever wondered what happened to the wives who loved the fallen angels more than they loved God's rules? Get ready to discover how their angel husbands turned against heaven and how these brave but foolish women suffered because of it. You'll learn why the Nephilim, the giant offspring born from this forbidden love, were wiped out by a terrible flood and how the angel Michael intervened to take control. But the biggest impact is what was done afterward to punish the wives. Stay with us to find out how their souls turned into sirens and why they still haunt our stories today. Today you know that sometimes a glance can change everything. Well, this story is about the greatest case of love at first sight that went wrong in history. Imagine this. In heaven, angels were doing their job, singing God's praises, keeping the universe running smoothly. They had one job, to serve God. Something simple, right? But then, something happened, something that shouldn't have. These powerful angels looked down to earth and saw something that made them stop in their tracks. Human women. Now, they weren't just any women. They were beautiful in a way unlike anything in heaven. It was truly wrong and human. This is where things get interesting. These angels, who were supposed to be above earthly desires, began to feel something new. It was like a yearning they couldn't explain. Every time they looked down, that feeling grew stronger. Their bright celestial glow began to darken as thoughts they shouldn't have filled their minds. Down on earth, life continued as usual. The women lived their lives, worked, laughed, and loved, unaware that above, powerful beings were breaking all the rules just to watch them. But something strange was also happening to these women. They felt watched and special, as if something incredible was about to happen. The air felt different. Do you know that feeling just before a huge storm arrives? That's what it felt like. Like everything was charged with energy, danger, and excitement all mixed together. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath waiting for something big. The angels knew they were playing with fire every time they considered leaving heaven. They remembered what they were supposed to be, servants of God, warriors of heaven. But that attraction grew stronger. They started asking questions they had never considered before. What if we could feel what humans feel? What if we could love like them? Their hearts that were meant to love only God were now filled with desires they couldn't control. Every day, more angels joined those who gazed at the earth. Every day their resolve weakened a little more. The choice was tearing them apart. Should they remain faithful to their purpose or give in to these new feelings? Everything was about to change. Heaven and earth were never meant to mix like this, but these angels who had stood by God's throne and seen the creation of the stars were ready to give it all. Up for what? A chance at human love? No one knew that this choice would trigger a chain of events that would shake both heaven and earth to their core. These angels were about to learn the hard way that some rules are not meant to be broken, no matter how tempting the reason. The moment these angels set foot on earth, magic happened, but not the good kind. Imagine the most beautiful person you've ever seen, and now multiply that by 1,000. That's how the fallen angels looked when they arrived. They didn't just walk, they glided. They didn't just speak, their words sounded like music. The light seemed to dance around them, making everything else look dull and boring. When they appeared in towns and cities, everyone stopped what they were doing. How could they not? It was like looking at the sun, painful to gaze at but impossible to look away. The women who saw them felt something they had never felt before. It wasn't just attraction or a simple desire, it was like being under a spell. These weren't just handsome strangers passing through town, were perfect in every way, or at least they seemed so. Their skin shone like moonlight, their eyes held all the stars in the sky, and when they smiled, well, that's when the real trouble started. But you know how they say if something seems too good to be true, it probably is? That was exactly what was happening here. These weren't just supermen. They were angels who had renounced heaven, and if you looked closely, you could see that something wasn't quite right. Their smiles hid secrets darker than night. Their eyes, although beautiful, were ancient and deep in a way no human could be. The women who met them felt drawn like moths to a flame. It wasn't fair, really. How do you say no to someone who literally shines with celestial light, who knows everything about you before you even speak, who can promise you things no mortal man could. But here's the terrifying part. The more time these women spent with the fallen angels, the more they themselves changed. It was as if they had caught some of that supernatural glow. They began to see things differently. Normal life was no longer enough. Common men seemed flat and boring compared to these celestial beings. The fallen angels knew exactly what they were doing. They chose the most beautiful women, those who had caught their attention from heaven. They used their celestial powers to appear as everything these women had dreamed of. It was like a fairy tale, but with a horror story twist every time one of these angels took a human wife. It sent shockwaves through both heaven and earth. These were not ordinary marriages. They were unions that should never have happened, and the children that would come from these unions. Well, that's where our story takes an even darker turn. Now let me tell you about the children of these forbidden marriages, the Nephilim. Imagine a child is born, but instead of staying small and adorable, they keep growing, and growing. These were not normal children. They were giants with a strength that could move mountains and appetites that could empty towns. When a Nephilim walked, the ground trembled. When they spoke, their voices echoed like thunder. Born with the power of their angel father and the feelings of their human mother, but without the wisdom to handle either. Imagine a toddler throwing a tantrum, but now make that toddler the size of a house. Scary, right? Cities lived in fear of these giants. Common people had no chance. The Nephilim took what they wanted, ate what they desired, and destroyed anything in their path. Some were as tall as trees, others even larger. They weren't just big, they were smart too, and that made them even more dangerous. Above in heaven, God saw all this unfold. His perfect world was being turned upside down by these hybrid creatures that should never have existed. His anger grew day by day as these giants terrorized his creation, the humans he so loved, living in constant fear, hiding in their homes, begging for help. That was the moment when the mightiest warriors of heaven, the archangels, knew they had to intervene, but even for them, this was not going to be easy. Fighting a Nephilim was like facing a force of nature. They were practically unstoppable, and there were many of them. The archangels gathered their armies. They knew this would be the greatest battle they would ever fight. Michael, Gabriel, and the others planned their attack carefully. They couldn't just rush in. They weren't fighting against demons. They were fighting against creatures with angelic blood in their veins. But here's the good thing about having God on your side. You get backup plans, and big ones. When the archangels realized that even they might not be enough to stop the Nephilim, God decided to intervene himself. He had a plan that would change the world forever, a flood that would wash away all the evil that had spread across the land. The battle that followed was like nothing the world had ever seen, the armies of heaven against the mighty Nephilim, with the greatest flood in history in sight. Lightning split the sky, thunder shook the mountain, and rain began to fall. The Nephilim, for the first time, felt something they had never felt: fear. It was about to become clear to everyone, angels, humans, and Nephilim alike, that some lines were never meant to be crossed. But before we continue, have you subscribed to the channel yet? If not, do it now, because we publish incredible content from the Bible weekly, which will increase your knowledge about the Bible and the events mentioned. What are you waiting for? Click that subscription button. Have you ever seen storm clouds so dark that day turns into night? Multiply that by 1,000,000. That's how the day began when God decided it was enough. The sky didn't just darken, it turned pitch black. The air became so dense it was barely breathable. At first, people didn't pay much attention. Rain was normal, right? But this was different. The raindrops were thick and heavy like tears from the very sky. They didn't fall. They crashed hour after hour, day after day. The rain didn't stop, without rest, without respite, just water falling ceaselessly from an enraged sky. The powerful Nephilim, who had terrorized everyone for so long, began to look scared for the first time. These giants who could crush rocks with their bare hands could do nothing against the rising water. They tried to climb the tallest mountains, but the flood kept rising higher. Their strength meant nothing. Nature itself had turned against them. You could hear the screams everywhere, people begging for mercy, crying out to the heavens. The fallen angels watched helplessly as their children, those powerful creatures they had created, struggled against the flood, but there was nothing they could do. This was God's punishment, and no power in heaven or earth could stop it. In the midst of all this chaos, a single ship floated safely. Noah's Arkansas. Imagine being on that ark, hearing the storm rage outside, feeling the waves toss you like a toy. Inside were the only humans and animals that would survive this world cleansing. Could hear the desperate cries of those outside dying, but they couldn't help. This was God's plan, and they had to trust it. The water rose higher and higher, first covering the fields, then the forests, then the hills. Even the tallest mountains disappeared under the endless waves. The Nephilim, those powerful giants who once seemed unstoppable, were now just another thing the flood swept away. Their incredible strength couldn't save them from drowning. The fallen angels could only watch from their chains as everything they had built, everyone they had loved, their perfect children, their human wives, and the cities they had helped build were all gone. The world they had corrupted was being washed away. For 40 days and 40 nights, the water fell from the sky. When it finally stopped, the world was a giant ocean. There were no mountains, no valleys, no cities, just water as far as the eye could see. The only sign of life was Noah's Arkansas, floating alone on the infinite sea. When the waters finally began to recede, they revealed a completely different world. Everything the Nephilim had built had vanished. It was like pressing a giant reset button on the earth, but for some, especially the wives of the fallen angels, an even worse punishment was about to begin. When the floodwaters finally disappeared, one might think the worst had passed, but for some, it was only the beginning. Remember those women who fell in love with the fallen angels? They survived the flood, but maybe that wasn't a blessing after all. Imagine this. You've loved someone with all your heart, someone perfect and powerful, only to see them dragged away in chains. That's what happened to these women. Their angel husbands, once so powerful and beautiful, were now bound in darkness. Some were chained in deep valleys, others trapped in spiritual prisons. They could no longer help their wives, couldn't protect them, couldn't even embrace them. The wives were left alone to face what they had done. Some of them completely fell apart. Imagine realizing that your choices helped bring about the end of the world. That's a heavy burden of guilt. They knelt begging God to forgive them and cried until they had no tears left, but not all of them felt remorse. Take Nama, for example. Beautiful and proud Nama, even after all this, didn't relent. She had been intoxicated by her own beauty and power, using them to lead others astray. Even now, she stood tall, refusing to admit she was wrong. Her pride became her prison. God's punishment was creative and cruel. These women turned into sirens, those creatures that lure sailors to their doom. Yes, they were them, cursed to be beautiful but deadly forever, drawing others to destruction just as they had been drawn. The psychological damage was intense. These women had to live with crushing guilt, knowing their choices helped destroy the world. Some went mad with pain. Others became empty shells of who they once were. The weight of what they had done was too heavy to bear, and their angel husbands chained in their prisons could feel everything their wives were going through. They could feel their pain, their desperation, their madness, but they could do nothing about it. Speaking of torture, the angels who remained faithful to God received a new job: to watch over this changing world. They had to make sure nothing like this ever happened again. They saw the sirens, once their sisters-in-law, singing their deadly songs. They saw humanity rebuilding, trying to forget the terror of the flood. It was a new chapter for everyone. The world had been washed clean, but the scars remained. The faithful angels kept their distance now, watching but never interfering. They had learned their lesson. Some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, no matter how tempting the reason, but there's an incident that will leave you amazed. A fight between two of the most powerful beings, Michael and Lucifer, and why they fought. Do you know why Lucifer wanted the body of Moses, yes, you heard right, the very Moses who parted the Red Sea, but this is not a common fight. This battle was so important it was kept secret in a 3,000-year-old Bible that most people don't even know exists. Do you want to know what made Michael so angry that he had to face Lucifer himself, or why Lucifer wanted Moses' body so badly? Trust me, what happened next changed everything we know about these powerful beings. Click on the video that appears on your screen right now. You won't believe what really went down between the greatest warrior of heaven and his greatest traitor. This is a biblical story that was definitely not taught in Sunday school.